Have you ever imagined what it would be like to have everything you ever dreamed of, but realize that something essential is missing? Thomas Miller was a successful man, but an unexpected diagnosis forced him to face his greatest fears. What did he see when the light began to shine through the darkness? Who were the mysterious figures waiting for him on the other side? And how could a single decision change the course of your life forever? This is a journey of self-discovery, faith, and redemption. What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite your story? Come with me to explore every detail of this thrilling near-death experience. I'm Anthony Bennett, and welcome to my Near-Death Experience channel. Let's listen to the story together. Thomas Miller, at 54 years old, was a man everyone admired for his professional career. From a young age, he dedicated himself to the business world, building a solid career as the founder of a successful consultancy in Chicago. With an impeccable reputation and a luxurious lifestyle, he had become an example of success for his colleagues and friends. His house, located in one of the city's most expensive suburbs, was often the scene of meetings and events that reinforced his position in society. Behind this successful businessman, there was a husband and father who, despite being present physically, maintained a certain emotional distance. Thomas had been married to Mary for over 30 years, a devout and deeply religious woman. She attended church every Sunday and always tried to involve Thomas in spiritual activities, but he was skeptical and avoided these discussions. For him, faith was a personal matter and, in his view, he was too busy to get involved with it. The couple's children, now adults, also felt this disconnection with their father. They knew Thomas loved them and always provided everything they needed, but the lack of a deeper connection was always noticeable. He was present for important events, but his mind always seemed to be somewhere else. This emotional distance created a void in the family dynamic, something that Mary tried to compensate with her affection and attention, but that, deep down, only Thomas could fill. Despite all his material wealth, Thomas began to feel a restlessness that he could not explain. As I grew older, thoughts arose about what really mattered in life. He saw his close friends begin to retire and dedicate themselves to personal projects, some even rediscovering spirituality. But Thomas, although he questioned himself, remained focused on his work, believing that success was the only path to fulfillment. Mary, noticing her husband's restlessness, suggested several times that they take a vacation or attend a spiritual retreat, but Thomas always found an excuse. He was stuck in his routine, and the idea of stopping to reflect on life seemed like a waste of time. However, this constant denial of his deepest feelings was starting to affect him in ways he couldn't ignore. It was then that Thomas began to experience physical symptoms that worried him. Chest pain and a feeling of constant tiredness led him to see a doctor. After a series of tests, he was diagnosed with a serious blockage in one of his coronary arteries, something that required unblocking surgery. The news shook him, but he decided to go ahead with the surgery, seeing it as another task to be solved. Thomas's decision to move forward with the surgery was made quickly, like everything else in his life. He scheduled the procedure as soon as possible, wanting to resolve the problem and return to his routine. Mary was worried but respected her husband's decision, although she tried to convince him to explore other options. She knew Thomas wasn't the type to sit still for long, and she feared he was underestimating the severity of the situation. In the days leading up to surgery, Thomas began to reflect on his life more deeply than he ever had before. An imminent surgical procedure always brings up questions about mortality, and for Thomas, this came as a shock. He had always considered himself strong and invincible, but now he found himself faced with his own vulnerability. For the first time, he began to question whether the path he had chosen in life was really the most important one. The nights leading up to the surgery were long and full of unsettling thoughts. Thomas found himself remembering moments from the past, reflecting on the decisions he had made, especially those that took him away from his family and spirituality. He wondered if there was more to life than just work and material success. Mary, noticing the change in her husband, suggested that they pray together, but Thomas, although touched by the offer, still remained distant. The morning of surgery, the tension was palpable. Mary and the children gathered around Thomas before he was taken to the operating room. They exchanged words of love and support, but Thomas felt a growing pressure in his chest, not only because of his physical condition, but also because of the emotional weight of that moment. As he was led into the room, he realized that, for the first time, he was truly scared. Not only with the surgery, but with the possibility that, perhaps, he was missing something essential in his life. On the way to the operating room, Thomas tried to calm his mind, focusing on what had always worked for him, logic and reason. He told himself that everything would be fine, that it was a routine procedure, and that he would be back to work soon. But even repeating those words, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different, as if he was about to face a journey much deeper than just surgery. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Thomas had one last conscious thought: what if I'm wrong about everything? This thought followed him as his vision darkened and he sank into a state of unconsciousness. What he didn't know was that he was about to have an experience that would change his life forever, an experience that would confront him with everything he had ignored until then. As his body lay numb under anesthesia, Thomas's consciousness began to emerge in a very different place. He found himself in a deep darkness, a void that, contrary to what one might expect, did not cause fear. On the contrary, it was a peaceful, almost welcoming darkness, as if he were in a state of absolute rest. There was no pain, no worry, just a sense of peace he had never experienced before. Thomas tried to understand where he was, but his attempts to rationalize the situation failed. He was nowhere he could recognize or describe. The darkness around him seemed infinite, but at the same time, it wasn't scary. Suddenly, he began to notice a point of light in the distance. At first, it was just a small, barely noticeable glow, but it quickly began to grow in intensity, forming a tunnel of light that stretched towards him. The light was unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. It wasn't just a physical light. She was warm, welcoming, filled with an energy that seemed to radiate love and compassion. He felt drawn to that light in an irresistible way, as if it were the final destination of a long journey. Without needing to move a muscle, he began to be pulled towards the tunnel, feeling lighter and lighter as he got closer. As he moved toward the light, Thomas began to see glimpses of his life. Images from his childhood, moments with his family, and even scenes from his career began to flash before his eyes. But unlike an ordinary retrospective, these images were charged with intense emotions. He felt the joy and pain of those moments in a way he had never experienced before, as if he were experiencing it all again, but with a new depth of understanding. As he got even closer to the light, Thomas felt the presence of something or someone. It was an unmistakable feeling of being watched, but not in an intrusive way. On the contrary, it was as if that presence was waiting for him, like an old friend he hadn't seen in a long time. And then, he heard a voice, not with his ears, but within his mind. The voice was soft, full of love, and said just one word: welcome. At that moment, Thomas felt a wave of emotion that almost made him cry. He didn't know what was happening, but he felt like he was in a sacred place, a place that transcended everything he had known. The light completely enveloped him, and he felt at peace, like he was finally home. It was such a powerful feeling that all the doubts and fears he carried instantly disappeared. He knew, somehow, that he was facing something divine. As Thomas continued to be enveloped by the light, the feeling of deep peace that overwhelmed him intensified. He felt as if he was being cleansed of all the worries and anxieties that had plagued him for years. In the midst of this serenity, the divine presence he had felt before began to become clearer. He did not see a physical figure, but he felt a powerful presence, a force of love and wisdom emanating from the light around him. Then the voice he had heard before spoke again, this time clearer and more distinct. "Thomas," said the voice, "you came this far because there is something you need to understand." Those words echoed in his mind, and at the same time, he felt a kind of opening in his soul, as if he was about to receive a revelation. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready to listen, to understand what that divine presence wanted to show him. Suddenly, the light around Thomas began to change, and he found himself transported to different moments in his life. The first scene was from his childhood, a moment when he was playing in the backyard of his house, feeling the pure joy of being a child. He saw his parents, young and full of life, caring for him with love. But then the scene changed to a time when he had fought with his father, refusing to accept his life lessons. Thomas felt the pain he caused his father in that moment, a pain he had never recognized before. The scenes continued to change, showing pivotal moments in his life. He saw the birth of his children, the joy he felt, but also the moments when he chose work over spending time with them. Each scene was accompanied by a deep emotion, as if he were experiencing it all again, but this time with a spiritual clarity he had never had before. He began to realize the impact of his choices, not only on his own life, but on those he loved. The voice then asked, "Thomas, what really matters to you?" He was silent for a moment, reflecting on everything he had seen. For the first time, he understood that the material success he had pursued for so long was insignificant compared to the love and connections he had neglected. He felt a deep sadness for all the lost opportunities, but at the same time, hope arose in his heart. It was as if he was being given a second chance. Thomas then saw one last scene, where he was in the present, on the operating table. He saw his wife and children anxiously waiting for news, their faces etched with worry and love. He realized how much they meant to him and how he wanted to be more present in their lives. The voice spoke again, "You have a chance to change, Thomas. Use the time you have left to find what really matters." These words echoed in his mind, bringing a clarity he had never experienced before. After this intense revelation, the light around Thomas began to shine even brighter, as if preparing for something even greater. He felt he was about to meet someone important, someone who could help him further understand the meaning of his experience. And then, out of the light, appeared figures he recognized immediately. They were his parents, who had passed away many years ago, but who now stood before him, smiling with love and understanding. Thomas was overcome by a wave of emotion at seeing his parents again. He didn't know what to say, but his eyes filled with tears. His parents looked younger, healthier, and radiated a peace he had never seen while they were alive. They didn't need to say anything, her simple look conveyed everything he needed to know. He felt the forgiveness, unconditional love, and acceptance he had longed for his entire life. His father was the first to speak. "Thomas, we were always with you, even when you thought you were alone. We saw your struggles, your achievements, and also your falls. But most of all, we saw the love you have inside you, even if it's sometimes you've forgotten that." These words touched Thomas deeply. He had always felt distant from his father, as if he had never been able to live up to his expectations. But now, he understood that all his father wanted was for him to be happy, in a way that Thomas had never fully understood. His mother, in a soft, caring voice, added, "Thomas, love is the most important thing you can give. Don't let fear or pride stop you from showing that love to those who are still with you." Thomas felt a pang in his heart when he heard that. He realized how far he had strayed from Mary and his children, how much he had let pride and the pursuit of success block what really mattered in his life. He knew he needed to change, but he also knew that this change would be challenging. At this moment, another figure appeared from the light. It was a being that radiated a divine presence, an angelic figure that seemed to be a messenger of something greater. "Thomas," said the being, "you are at a point of choice. You can move forward into eternal peace, where there is no more pain or suffering, or you can return to the physical world, where you still have the opportunity to make things differently." Thomas fell silent, feeling the weight of the decision before him. He knew that choosing to stay meant abandoning all the opportunities for redemption he had just realized. But choosing to return meant facing the difficulties and challenges of changing his life. He looked at his parents, who smiled at him, conveying the message that no matter what choice he made, they would always be by his side. Thomas felt an internal struggle between the peace he could achieve and the desire to make peace with his family and himself. Finally, with a heavy but determined heart, Thomas chose to return. He knew he still had work to do, that there was still time to reconnect with those he loved and to find new purpose in his life. He looked at the divine figure and said, "I choose to return. I want to change. I want to do what is right." The angelic figure nodded, and the light around Thomas began to slowly dim, preparing him to return to the physical world. As Thomas began to return to consciousness, he felt a lightness in his being, as if an immense burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The first thing he heard was the sound of machines around him, followed by the comforting voice of Mary, who was at his side, holding his hand. His eyes slowly opened, and he saw her face, marked by tiredness and worry, but also by immense relief at seeing him wake up. Thomas felt a rush of emotion as he realized he was back, that he had chosen the most difficult but also the most meaningful path. Mary smiled through her tears, holding Thomas's hand tightly. "You're back," she whispered, voice cracking with emotion. Thomas tried to speak, but his words came out as a whisper. He simply squeezed Mary's hand in response, feeling a deep connection with her, something he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, he realized how much she meant to him, not just as a wife, but as his partner in every way, his anchor when he needed it most. The days that followed were of recovery, both physical and emotional. Thomas underwent physical therapy sessions to strengthen his body after surgery, but the real work was happening in his heart and mind. He reflected deeply on the experience he had had, on what he had seen and felt. The revelation that he had neglected what really mattered in his life motivated him to make significant changes. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to try. Thomas began to open up to Mary about what had happened during the surgery. He told her about the darkness, the light, and meeting his parents. Mary listened attentively, without interrupting, and when he finished, she tenderly cupped his face. "Thomas, I always knew you had a good heart. I was just waiting for the right time for you to see that too." These words touched Thomas deeply. He felt a renewed connection with Mary, something that seemed to have been lost over the years. This new perception also extended to his children. Thomas knew he needed to reconnect with them, that he had wasted so much time by just focusing on work. He began spending more time with them, listening to their stories, their concerns, and sharing his own life experiences. The emotional distance between them began to slowly dissipate, replaced by a stronger, more authentic bond. The near-death experience was not just an isolated event in Thomas's life, it was the catalyst for a profound transformation. He began to question his values and priorities, seeking a balance between professional success and emotional and spiritual well-being. The changes didn't happen overnight, but over time, Thomas began to realize that the true richness in life was in the relationships he built, the love he shared, and the faith he was beginning to rediscover. Thomas knew his near-death experience was a calling to something greater. He could no longer ignore the signs he had received, and decided it was time to seek a spiritual path, something he had avoided his entire adult life. He began accompanying Mary to church, something that before, I only did it sporadically and without much interest. Now every sermon, every prayer, seemed to resonate in a new and powerful way within him. At first, Thomas felt a little out of place, like he was trying to adapt to something that wasn't part of his identity. But over time, he began to find comfort in the church community. The pastor's words, which had previously seemed distant and irrelevant, now touched him deeply. He began to see faith not as a weakness, but as a source of strength and guidance in difficult times. Each week, his connection with spirituality grew stronger. Mary watched this transformation with joy and gratitude. She had prayed for years that Thomas would find a spiritual path, but had never pushed, respecting his time. Now, seeing him draw closer to God in such a genuine way was the answer to her prayers. Together, they began participating in Bible study groups, discussing issues of faith and life with other church members. Thomas began to realize that there was a lot to learn, but he felt more open and accepting than ever. The rediscovery of faith also brought to light Thomas's need to make peace with his past. He knew he had hurt people throughout his life, especially those he loved most. With Mary's encouragement, he decided to seek out his children and apologize for his emotional absence. These moments were difficult, but also deeply healing. His children, although surprised by their father's sudden openness, accepted his apology and began to rebuild their relationship with him. Additionally, Thomas began to get involved in volunteer activities organized by the church. He discovered that helping others brought him a satisfaction that material success had never provided. Taking part in food drives, helping out at shelters, and supporting social causes has become a regular part of her life. He felt connected to something greater, a purpose that transcended business and money. This new direction in Thomas's life made him feel fulfilled in a way he had never experienced before. Thomas's transformation was noticed by everyone around him. His co-workers, who had always seen him as a relentless, focused leader, began to notice a new lightness in his demeanor. He didn't abandon his company, but he started delegating more, allowing himself more time to focus on what really mattered. Little by little, he found a balance that, for years, had seemed impossible. His spiritual journey was just beginning, but he already felt like he was on the right path. Despite the positive changes, Thomas soon discovered that maintaining his new approach to life would not be easy. The old habits and pressures of the business world often tried to pull him back to his old way of life. There were times when he felt tempted to return to work obsessively as a way of dealing with stress and anxiety. However, he remembered the promise he had made to himself and to the divine being he had encountered during his near-death experience. One of the biggest challenges was dealing with the reaction of its business partners. Some viewed Thomas's move with skepticism, believing he was losing focus. They feared that Thomas's new attitude could affect the company's profits. In meetings, he often found himself pressured to return to his old habits of exhausting work and an exclusive focus on financial results. But Thomas, while he understood these concerns, knew he couldn't go back to the way he was before. He stood his ground, defending the importance of balancing work and personal life. At home, challenges also arose. Although his children were happy to see their father more present, there were times when the family dynamic became complicated. Thomas's new willingness to be more involved in his children's lives brought to the surface old hurts and frustrations that had been buried for years. He realized that the road to emotional healing would be long and would require patience, understanding, and, above all, time. There were moments of tension, but also of growth and learning. Mary, as always, was a pillar of support for Thomas. She helped him stay focused by constantly reminding him of what really mattered. At times when Thomas was tempted to fall back into old patterns, she gently redirected him toward the new path he had chosen. Together, they began to establish new family routines, like eating dinner together every night and making time for meaningful conversations. These small acts helped solidify the changes Thomas was trying to implement. Another significant challenge was Thomas's own spirituality. Although he experienced a profound revelation during his near-death experience, integrating this new worldview into his daily life was not easy. He was faced with doubts and moments of uncertainty. There were days when he wondered if everything he had experienced was real or just a figment of his imagination. But in those moments, he turned to prayer and conversations with Mary and his faith community, finding comfort and clarity. Even with all the challenges, Thomas began to see the fruits of his perseverance. He felt more at peace with himself and the world around him. Relationships with his children were strengthening, and he began to enjoy a closeness with Mary that he had not felt in years. At work, he found that by delegating and trusting his team more, the company continued to thrive, perhaps even more than before. Thomas was beginning to see that the change he had chosen was not only possible, but deeply rewarding. As the months passed, Thomas continued to reflect on his life's purpose and the legacy he wanted to leave. The near-death experience had shown him that life was much more than material success and professional achievements. He began thinking about how he could use his time and resources to make a positive impact on the world, something that went beyond his company and personal achievements. These reflections led him to consider new ways of contributing to society. One of the ideas that came up was the creation of a foundation that would help young entrepreneurs start their own businesses, but with a different focus than he had previously had. Thomas wanted to encourage a new generation of leaders to think not just about profits, but also about how their companies could benefit the community and the environment. He began developing this idea, bringing together experts and partners who could help him turn his vision into reality. This project began to occupy a central place in his life. Additionally, Thomas began to become more actively involved in his local community. He and Mary began participating in community and charity projects, something he had never considered important before. Thomas was surprised to discover that these small acts of service brought him deep satisfaction, a sense of connection to something greater than himself. He began to realize that true success was not measured by money or power, but by the good one did in the world. The conversations Thomas had with Mary during this time also helped him find a new sense of purpose. Mary has always believed that everyone has a calling, something God wants us to do to make the world a better place. For Thomas, that calling was becoming increasingly clear. He wanted to use his skills and resources to create something that would last, something that would continue to positively impact people's lives even after he was gone. Thomas also began thinking about the legacy he would leave for his children. He knew that for many years he had set the wrong example by prioritizing work above all else. Now, he wanted to show them that life is richer and more meaningful when balanced with love, faith, and service to others. He began having deeper conversations with them about these topics, sharing his own struggles and what he had learned along his journey. These reflections culminated in a sense of peace and fulfillment that Thomas had never felt before. He knew there was still a lot of work to be done, but he was confident he was on the right path. He had undergone a profound transformation, and although the future was uncertain, he was determined to continue living according to the new values he had discovered. Thomas felt that he was finally beginning to understand the true meaning of life. Thomas's journey had taken him from a man focused exclusively on material achievements to someone deeply connected to his spirituality and life purpose. The changes he implemented not only transformed his own life, but also profoundly impacted everyone around him. His family, who had previously seen him as distant and busy, now saw him as a present husband and father, someone who valued time together and cared deeply about everyone's well-being. At work, Thomas's colleagues and employees noticed a change in his approach. He became more approachable, more willing to listen and consider the needs of others. The environment at the company changed from a high-pressure culture to one that was more collaborative and supportive. The foundation he created to support young entrepreneurs began to gain traction, attracting support and recognition for its focus on sustainability and social responsibility. Thomas finally found a way to leave a positive and lasting legacy. Mary was one of the people most impacted by Thomas's transformation. After years of prayer and patience, she finally saw her husband open up to spirituality and the unconditional love she always knew he had within himself. Their marriage, which was already strong, became even deeper. Together, they continued to actively participate in church and community, inspiring other couples to work on their own relationships and seek greater purpose in their lives. Thomas's children were also deeply touched by their father's move. They began to see in him not just an example of professional success, but of integrity, humility, and love. The conversations Thomas had with them about faith, purpose, and legacy left a lasting mark. They began to think differently about their own lives, inspired by their father's courage to change and pursue what really mattered. The relationship between them strengthened, and they began to value family moments even more. Thomas's transformation also had a significant impact on the church community. His story of near-death and subsequent life change has become a source of inspiration for many. He has been invited to share his experience on numerous occasions, both at church and at community events. Thomas, who has always been private about his personal life, found a new mission in sharing his story in the hopes that it could help others find their way to faith and a more meaningful life. Ultimately, Thomas's near-death experience was the catalyst for profound and lasting change. He went from a materially focused man to someone who valued love, faith, and service to others above all else. The peace he found in following this new path was the ultimate reward, and he knew that no matter what the future held, he was prepared to face it with an open heart and a renewed soul. The heavenly vision he saw was not just a passing experience, but the beginning of a new life, a life he was determined to live to the fullest, with purpose and gratitude.